Good luck, everybody.
Okay, I think we're good to start. Hi, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the first of our webinar series here today, all focused around frontline workers. My name's Charlene Cottle, and I'm joined by some of my colleagues today, and we're going to be taking you through the very first of our frontline worker focused webinar series today. So let's get started. Just to give you a bit of an overview then in terms of what you can expect out of today's session. So I'll talk to you a little bit. We'll do some introductions. You'll get to know who everybody is. And then we're really going to just focus on, I guess, the journey that we've come through from a WM Reply perspective in terms of this kind of understanding some of the pain points and some of the use cases for frontline workers in terms of adopting M365 technology. But then we're really going to get into some of those wider use cases. And we're going to talk all about return on investment, and then we'll have a little summary at the end, and we've also got some time for questions as well. Okay, so as I say, a very warm welcome from all of us. Just to introduce myself properly, so my name's Charlene Cottle, and I am our Retail and Transport Business Unit Manager here at WM Reply. So for me, I look after lots of our clients who have really big frontline worker workforces. So it's really important for me to understand those pain points, to understand those use cases, and to really understand how we can support them. I'm also joined today by Joe Matthews, who is one of our senior adoption and change management consultants here at WM Reply. So Joe is going to talk to you a little bit about some of those cultural benefits too. And we're also joined today by James Beresford, who is one of our principal consultants here at WM. So James is going to talk to you about some of the technical delivery. So what are the things that really help us to better enable frontline workers? What does the technology start to look like? And we are very lucky today to be joined by Sarah Miller, who is a product marketing manager at Microsoft. And Sarah is going to give us a little bit of an overview around the return on investment. So we're very aware that, you know, as some of you are starting on this journey in terms of enabling frontline workers, one of the things that you have to do is justify what that return on investment looks like. And so Sarah's joining us today to help us with that. Okay, before I hand over to the team, I kind of wanted to set the context for why we're doing a webinar series this year focused on frontline workers. And I guess if I can't see who's on yet today, but I know we've got a good chunk of people on. I think in terms of if you know us already, you'll know that WM, we've been delivering, I suppose, for information workers since we started as a business. And a lot of our work has always been focused around, you know, creating beautiful instruments, automating those business processes. Yes, we connect employees to the tools they use every day, and we have a fantastic change and adoption offering. But I think what we would probably say is that journey so far, up until a few years back, was very much focused on how we can enable information workers. So those people who sit behind a desk, those people who have access to a laptop and can use these tools every single day. And I'd say about 5 years ago was when we really started to have more and more conversations about what could the return on investment look like for frontline workers, and how is it that, you know, the tools that they use every day, which are everywhere, you know, how can we make their life simpler? And so we really got into this piece around envisioning, and it was very much focused on, you know, helping stakeholders to understand what the use cases should look like for frontline workers and what some of those return on investment would be like and some of those business benefits, but also working with those end users, working with those frontline workers to help them to understand their pain points, and then for us to start to think about how can this technology better enable them. And we've been on that journey for a while now, and all of our clients actually are at very, very different stages. But what I can say, and one of the reasons why we wanted to deliver this webinar series this year, is because probably for the first time in those 5 years, we're now at a position as a consultancy where we can say, actually, we are developing in this space now. We are delivering as well as a consultancy in this space, and we feel we've got some knowledge to share. So, you know, what you'll hear from us are some of these use cases, but, you know, what are we doing in this space? Well, okay, we are building custom solutions. We're utilizing Viva for frontline workers, because what you'll hear from the team as we talk through this, you know, probably 5 years ago, we could say the solution wasn't really there for frontline workers. but now it is. And actually, how can we really leverage that, and how can we make use of these tools? Some of the stuff that you'll hear about as well is about how we're extending the out-of-the-box capability within Teams to allow it to do the things that, you know, our clients want those tools to do. So, you know, if something isn't 100% there for your particular use case, well, how can we build upon it instead of just replacing it with a totally different tool or system? And also, some of the work that we're doing in this space is about integrating other apps and solutions into this one-stop shop that allows frontline workers to have that benefit of going to one place to really access everything that they need to do their job. And I'm really confident in saying that as a consultancy, we're in quite a strong position now where we are in a space where we're doing lots of this work. And we wanted to start to share some of those stories, but also maybe to understand a little bit more about some of the other different industries, and what, you know, what your challenges are and how we could potentially help. So that's, I guess, our journey, and that's a little bit of an overview. And so to kick us off, we have our very first webinar today, which is very much focused on benefits and return on investment. And we've structured it in this way because we know a lot of our clients, when they start off on this journey, it's very much about building up the use cases, building up the, you know, the, I guess, plan that will allow us to go away and talk to our most senior stakeholders and say, actually, we know that there's going to be some business benefit. We know that there's a return on investment that we can start to generate by better enabling our frontline workers. So that's what today is all about. Now, we will leave you today with some kind of insights into some of the work that we're doing. But our next session, which is going to be really focused on practical solutions for frontline workers, we'll go into that in a lot more detail. So again, we'll have a Microsoft colleague joining us for that session, who's going to talk a little bit more about how we're using Viva now to better connect frontline worker employees to the tools that they need to use every day. We'll also have our third session in August that's really focused around adoption. And that is really key. If you know WM, you'll know that we have a strong adoption team here that are really focused on the Microsoft tech stack. And the reason for that is because we need to understand every single employee's kind of wants and needs so that we know that we're getting them to use the tools in the right way. And so that session is really going to be providing some tips and tricks about how you can achieve successful adoption, but really focused on that frontline worker audience. And then we'll do a bit of a year in review. It was a bit of a mouthful there. So in November, we're going to look at our top tips, and we're going to look at some success stories. And I'm hopeful as well for that one that we'll be able to bring some of our other clients along so they can talk from their points of view as well. So that's just a bit of an overview from me. This is an overview of what you can expect from the webinar series. I really hope that you all get something out of it. But again, continue to feedback and share with us what are the things that you're interested in hearing more about, because it helps us to shape the content as well. And very finally from me, I will just say we'll be taking Q&A questions at the very end. So please use the Q&A chat, drop your messages in there. If we don't respond immediately, it's just because we're going to be answering those right at the very end. So yeah, so please feel free to drop them in. And without further ado, I shall hand over to Sarah, who is going to talk us through that return on investment and you know, some of the justifications that you guys can start to talk to some of your stakeholders about. Thanks, Sarah.
Charlene. Thank you, and thanks for having me today. It's a really a great pleasure to be able to chat with our audience members about the return on investment to connecting frontline, because spoiler alert, it's high, and it's quite a joy to share that good information. Can we go to the next slide, please? So first, let's just get grounded in who we're talking about when we're talking about frontline workers, right? So this term that has been sort of colloquialized due to, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. Who are we talking about when we're talking about frontline workers? It's 80% of our workforce, and it's anyone who doesn't sit behind a desk. So I love this illustration. You can see it's grocery store workers, it's nurses, doctors, first responders, people who work on construction sites, social care workers, rubbish collectors, delivery drivers, right? So the workforce that helps the world go round. They're the people who you'll notice if they stop working because maybe your lights go out or the grocery store won't open, right? So they're incredibly important. And historically, you know, speaking 5-10 years ago, nobody was thinking about why it would be worth it to digitally connect them. But as we've seen with customers as of late, it's becoming more and more not only imperative to connect your frontline from a business point of view, but also from a talent point of view, right? Because it's more attractive to retain talent. So that's some of the forms of return on investment that I'll be touching on. So if we could go to the next slide. Microsoft did a large body of work surveying many different organizations that are particularly heavy on a frontline workforce. And this is called the Work Trend Index. We can drop the link in the chat after this. But we essentially went out to seek, what do frontline workers want? And what results can organizations expect when they connect their frontline? So I'm going to walk through some of these really powerful statistics to just show you that return on investment that we've gathered from real life examples. So 63% of frontline workers are excited for the opportunity that new technology creates. This is actually counter to that trope that you may have heard of historically, where people are maybe fearful that technology will take their jobs. On the contrary, 63% of frontline workers are excited to use technology. This makes sense because frontline workers are also consumers, and their experience as consumers, let's say you're in the checkout line at Tesco and you have a really beautiful digital experience. Why should that be any different for a frontline worker who's working at Tesco? Shouldn't they be able to access the tools they need to do their job digitally? Looking on the top there, tech ranks on the list of factors that could help reduce stress behind pay and paid time off. This is actually my favorite statistic on this slide because it shows the mutual benefit to connecting frontline workers. They see it as a really, impactful stress reliever in their day-to-day work. But of course, it's also really impactful for organizations, which we'll talk about on the bottom row there. 46% of workers fear job loss if they don't adapt to new technology. So if we're digitally connecting frontline workers, we also have the opportunity to give them the avenue to, adapt to that new technology, to also learn via that new technology. And I'm sure in the next, session on Viva and Frontline, Viva learning for frontline workers is a huge element of how we, solve for this. And then we're also helping separate work-life balance for frontline workers. So historically, frontline workers probably message on social media apps, or maybe they're using just regular text or WhatsApp to get in touch with their managers, which might work in a small scale organization. But if you have a large frontline workforce, as we know many organizations do, it becomes untenable for that line manager. So frontline workers want the ability to separate work and life, set quiet hours, and turn off when they're off shift. So we know that frontline workers, they want this technology, they're ready to adopt it. So investing in that technology from an organization standpoint, we know that frontline workers are hungry to use technology in their day-to-day. Now, what are the results that organizations can expect? These are pretty powerful. 87% of organizations that invest in frontline workers see higher worker satisfaction. This also makes, inherent intuitive sense. Workers who feel invested in are more likely to feel satisfied in their day-to-day. 91% of organizations that invest in frontline workers see increased performance and productivity. I'm sure we've all experienced that beautiful sensation when maybe you get a new computer, a work computer, or maybe you just get new headphones or a new mouse, and it makes you more excited to do work. It feels inherently true that if you're given the tools to do your job, you feel more productive, you feel more operational. I always equate it to having new trainers and wanting to go to the gym, right? So it feels like you're excited to get to work. Deploying Microsoft 365 solutions can increase employee training efficiency by 19%, particularly for those seasonal workforces where training, onboarding, and retention are really important. The fact that we can increase that efficiency by 19% results in huge savings depending on that size of the organization. But because seasonal workforces are frontline workers, we see that this is a huge indicator of return on investment. And then finally, 70% of organizations that digitally empower frontline workers increase sales and revenue. So frontline workers are often, on that customer facing side of the business. Happier workers leads to better customer service, leads to greater revenue and profitability. It's a pretty straight line, and we're seeing that across the board in organizations who have invested in their frontline. Next slide, and the last slide from me, is really zeroing in on the reduction in turnover that organizations see when they connect their frontline workers with Microsoft 365. So this is from our Forrester Total Economic Impact Report. This is another study that Microsoft did to understand, the impact that organizations can expect when they connect their frontline workers digitally. So by reducing turnover by 8%, that results in amazing savings, dollar savings from the part of the organization. And at a very higher level, a reduction in turnover also indicates happier employees, which has knock-on effects that are much less measurable, but nevertheless true. So I really love this statistic because I think it gets to those dollars and cents, but it also has wonderful implications as to the well-being and employee experience that you're providing for frontline workers who are invested in. So that's all from me. I believe I'm passing it to. Am I passing it back to you, Charlene?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Sarah.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Okay, so next we kind of wanted to look at what those benefits look like in practice, and I love that, Sarah. Those statistics are great because we can start to like put some pounds now to this kind of return on investment, can't we? I guess my background is in change and adoption. So for me, I also want to look at it from a point of view of, if I'm an end user and, I've got access to tools like Teams, for example, as a frontline worker, what difference is that going to make to my working life? So I would like to hand over to Joe Matthews, who is one of our change adoption consultants. And Joe is going to talk us through the cultural impact. What does that mean, in my life as an employee? Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Charlene, and thanks, Sarah. I do love those stats. When it comes to the cultural benefits of M365, as Sarah said, ultimately companies want the maximum level of productivity from all employees. So we saw from Sarah before that 91% of organisations who invest in frontline workers see that increase in performance and productivity. And ultimately, that's what's going to drive profits and how we're going to get the most out of our employees. And for me, productivity is all about two things. We talk about engagement, which means that people want to do their job. They want to work for that company. They feel positive and productive in their day-to-day role in working there. And the second element is enablement. So it's all about helping people and making them feel supported in that role. You can have someone who is as eager to work there as you like, but if they're not clear on what they're doing, then it's hard for them to be really productive. So Microsoft technology can help us in both of those areas. So if we start talking about engagement, workers need to feel connected with their organisation and like they're adding value to the business in their role every day. So in order to do that, they need to understand, where is the company even heading in the first place? What is the strategic direction? And what's the vision for the future? But how does a frontline worker who is so busy on the floor every day working on their job, not sat behind a laptop, understand what that overall vision is? How do they keep in the know of what's changing, where things are heading, and how they can contribute towards that bigger success piece? And this is where Microsoft 365 can start to provide that platform where leaders can really showcase organisational updates. Internal comms teams can really help push key messages, and this is all in reach of those frontline worker groups. And only then can they start to really recognise how their everyday role is contributing towards that bigger picture. And if we don't successfully engage our frontline workers, that is where we're going to generally start to see that higher turnover, as workers don't feel personally invested in the business and like they're contributing towards the bigger picture. So, for example, a travel company who's got frontline maintenance workers, whether that's on railway tracks, fixing cars, perhaps they're out fixing electricity pylons. M365 is going to make it easier than ever for them to understand how that contributes to the wider goals. If things are changing in the organisation and the vision and the purpose starts to change, how might their role slightly shift in order to achieve that bigger picture. Now, they also need a platform to provide their own feedback and have their say in where the organisation's heading as well. And we know that building a sense of community and belonging in an organisation is also going to increase that drive to work hard, meet demands, because people feel like they're part of a team. So platforms like Yammer and Teams can give workers a place to find colleagues to connect with similar interests, to feel like they are part of that wider group of people just like them, so that everyone's in it together and building up towards that wider goal that we talked about before. Now, if we go on to the next slide, please, Carly, in the background there, when it comes to enablement and making sure our workers feel really supported, it's really important that people have the opportunity to develop their skills and learn whilst they're working. So organisations have to find a way to showcase that learning and development that's on offer to frontline workers, and help them kind of carve out the time to physically go away for those development activities as well. We know it's tough when their jobs are so busy and demanding. How do they find time to keep growing and developing? But it is important to focus on that, because it's as that growth and development starts to plateau that we start to see people lose a little bit of interest. Perhaps that's where we get some reduced efficiency, or potentially people leaving altogether. So we've got to get that support to help people progressing through the business. And a big part of that is in clarity of what you're there to do every day, making sure that you're feeling like you're achieving new goals and achieving kind of what you're there to do each day, and how you can take that a little bit further as you start to progress through the business. And in the top left of the screen there, you can see a video kind of showing how it's highlighting some of the tasks that a frontline worker might need to work on each day. They can have that clarity of what tasks they need to get through and tick those off. And it's really helping feeling like that sense of achievement, sense of drive, and what you're successfully getting through and achieving each day. And I'd say the last point here as well around enablement is we just can't expect any employees to work efficiently and at pace for that productivity there if they're spending loads of time searching for the tools and apps that they need to do their job. Microsoft 365 is going to help by bringing the tools and applications together into more easy to access spaces, particularly when we talk about things like Viva Connections. So this saves a lot of time and frustration in finding the information or tool you need to do your job, having to log on to different systems, perhaps different phones or tablets to be able to log into different areas to keep up to speed with your work. We want to reduce as much as that time so that people can focus on what they're really there to do and the job that they enjoy. So that's an overview of some of the cultural benefits. As I said, engagement, enablement, equal productivity, equal higher retention. But yeah, I'd love to now hand over to James, who I think is going to talk us through about how we're technically going to overcome some of these rollout challenges.
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, as Joanna mentioned, we've now got a few examples of where some of the work we've done for clients around the frontline worker workspace. The first one is a sort of common theme that we've discussed with many clients, and it seems to be this common theme there, which is around the JML process, or the joiner mover leaver process, and particularly around the onboarding and offboarding process. So one of that big time-consuming issue is around the sort of the management of accounts. So most companies, their frontline workers have a higher turnover of staff than within their general office staff. So what that tends to do is put enormous pressure on the sort of the IT services in terms of, say, creating those accounts, maintaining them accounts, and disabling or removing those accounts at the end of that process. So for example, when there's a new joiner, obviously you've got to create the account. Obviously, if they're in terms of teams, making sure they're added to the appropriate team and using the appropriate teams available to them, and then also obviously disabling those accounts as well. So in terms of the solution, and what we did here for this particular client was we automated that process as much as possible. So, and that was using a combination of Azure, a Logic app in Azure, and SharePoint. And with that, we essentially were synchronizing users or accounts from within the payroll system So essentially taking a snapshot of the payroll system in terms of those frontline workers, and then storing that and using that list as a comparison against the previous list to essentially get any of those new users available to us. So essentially straight away we can go, okay, well these 50 employees are new frontline workers. Obviously then checking against those users that have been removed or were no longer on that spreadsheet in terms of those new starters. And then also checking against the store group as well. So essentially the store that their users will be part of. And as part of that process, then we were essentially automating the creation of those accounts, creating essentially a unique password for that user, adding them to the appropriate Azure group so they're automatically licensed appropriately so they can use those tools that are available to them, adding them to the relevant team group for that store. So straight away, as soon as they obviously log in, they'll be able to go into Teams and see that store straight away, and obviously then be able to immediately collaborate with their fellow store members. And then obviously essentially part of that process as well in terms of shifting teams, obviously as we know with frontline workers as well, they quite often end up shifting stores or pubs or shops or whatever it might be. They need to move to different ones. So as part of that process, that information we also synchronize from the payroll system. So we're able to say, okay, well this user has moved from this store to this store, and essentially removing them from one team and adding them to the next appropriate team. So they've got access straight away to the team that their colleagues are a member of. And then obviously as final part of that process was that disabling of accounts as well. So obviously as part of that comparison, we're able to see which accounts were no longer present within the payroll system, or had been essentially deactivated within the payroll system. So we could say, okay, well straight away now we know that we can disable that account. And what this has done for this particular client has essentially really alleviated their IT team of any real pressure or stress in terms of having that management of those accounts, and it's just really enabled them to get on with other work essentially. So yeah, that's in terms of the JML process. Next slide, please. And this second example is around sort of improving customer service. So in this particular example, we essentially it was regards to the airline industry, and how we've worked with sort of cabin crew teams to essentially help them to access the operational employees whilst they're in the air. So we've all had, I suppose we've probably had this issue before, many of us, where we've been on a flight and we've landed and we've turned up at obviously baggage reclaim to find that our baggage isn't there, and then we've gone about trying to understand, well, where is our baggage? How do I get hold of it? And in terms of this, so that was obviously one of the pain points, and we've, in terms of our solution here, we've enabled those cabin crew members to be able to have conversations and collaborate with those operational staff whilst they're in the air. And we've done this through integrating the third-party systems into Teams. So with this, they're enabled essentially straight away. Those flights have their own team, and those team members, obviously within those flights, we're essentially integrating, synchronizing those memberships so that those flight staff, flight crew, have access to that team, and they're able to then have conversations with the operational services team. Which means that, for example, in this scenario, it's really helped in terms of that baggage, not so much with the baggage issue, but being able to have that conversation straight away, to be able to say, the operational services can say, oh, that piece of luggage, it's not going to be there on arrival, and to essentially give information in terms of the passenger whose luggage won't be there, well in advance, so that the cabin crew can then speak to that passenger and say, and although obviously it's not stopping that luggage from magically appearing within baggage reclaim, but it essentially is giving them forewarning so that straight away they're not going to have that surprise when they get down there, and they'll know exactly where it's going to be and when it's going to turn up, hopefully. So that's one area where we've really sort of improved customer service. And the final example, Charlene, thank you. And the final example is really around analytics and integrating data so that frontline workers really know have their sort of targets and performance. So in this example, we've integrated with some third-party software to essentially pull those stats into an area where we can essentially manipulate the stats to present it how we want to present. And then within a personalized Teams app, we've created a dashboard of data that is essentially personalized and unique to that person viewing that data. So for example, if you've got area managers and store managers, then that data available to them within that app is unique to them. So they can go in and see, for example, things like incident breakdowns. It's unique to their store, or employee satisfaction information, again within that dashboard, and they're able to see that specifically for their store. So they've got all those tools right at their hand to be able to see directly, and obviously that personalized touch as well, which enables them to really, not to have to filter through data. They've got all that data available to them right there. And that's that third example. And I think it's back to you, Charlene.
It is. Fabulous. All right. So thanks everybody, and thanks Sarah, thanks Joe, and thanks James. They were fantastic. We are before we open up for questions. So a few things that I just wanted to share. Obviously, first and foremost, thanks so much for joining us. I can't see many questions in the Q&A just yet, but now's a good time to start posting them. If you have enjoyed today's webinar, the next one that we'll be hosting is on the 17th of May. So you can scan the QR code here, and we'll be sharing it as well on LinkedIn, etc. So yeah, it'd be great to have you join us and to hear a little bit more about some of these practical use cases. If you are interested in understanding a little bit more about how you can support your frontline workers, then do let us know. There are some really useful Microsoft funded workshops that are all focused around frontline workers. And we can often utilise these to start to understand some of those use cases and to provide some recommendations about your first steps. And then finally, and I'll kind of come to this big screen here. So if you know us well, you'll know that we love an event at WM. And our event this year, which they always follow this fall in love theme, which actually the graphics really we look like a lovely bunch, don't we? But essentially we are really focused on do more with less this year. So really helping our clients to we know times are challenging and costs are always being challenged. So how can we really leverage what we already have in place? And this year's event is going to be really focused on just that. How can you do more with the licenses that you currently have? How can you really start to fully leverage them and fully utilize them? So feel free to join us. We'd love to have you with us. The event will be in London, so it's a face-to-face event. And if you can't, we'll be having lots more webinars, and do follow us because we'll be sharing those regularly. And finally then, I would just like to say thank you, and then I will open up for any questions that we have. So Carly, maybe if I can bring you back to take us through anything that we have in the chat.
Awesome. All right. Nice session, everyone. Super informative. We did get 2 questions that popped through, Charlene. So the first one is, what would you say the biggest challenge is for rolling out M365 with frontline workers? How do you guys tackle it at WM?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think in terms of overcoming that challenge, I'll go first, and James, Joe, feel free to chip in. I think from my perspective, overcoming the challenges we've got to start with understanding the challenges, really. So we've got to start with understanding what are the business benefits to enabling your frontline workers. What are the benefits for frontline workers themselves? And we need to really just understand those use cases, those ways of working, and how we can start to really utilize this tool set for them. In terms of overcoming those challenges, then when we've got those answers, actually positioning the story of what life can be like for them using these tools is quite easy, actually. Yes, we've got to maybe shape the solution. Yes, we want to engage them, but when there's a clear win for them, it's rare that projects we've been delivering where we have any pushback from a frontline worker's perspective. One of the reasons why we wanted to shape this session in the way that we have today is so that we can talk through the return on investment. Yes, we need to understand what it means in pounds. We want to understand what the cultural benefits are, and, you know, practically how can we start to look at some of these solutions. But I think in terms of overcoming those challenges, we know that there are lots of different ways that we can kind of tackle it. But what's really key is it has to be focused on solving those pain points. If I'm a frontline worker, no matter my role, whether I work in a bar, whether I work in a shop, whether I, you know, work in as cabin crew for an airline, whether I'm a train driver, whatever my role is, I have to really know that these tools are going to solve problems for me. I need to know that it's going to give me access to the things that I want. So it's a case of designing a solution that has end users in mind, and communicating to them in a way that will really resonate with them. And I think that's when we can start to overcome those challenges.
Can I add to that, Charlene?
James. Yeah, go for it, Jo.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges as well is just around getting awareness out to those people that new tech is coming and what it's there to do. And I know that with us, one of the really powerful things we see is some really great engagement videos that will highlight some of those benefits. So it's not just kind of relying on telling people, oh, there's more coming, don't worry, it's going to be a good thing for you. It's really trying to showcase what those benefits are going to be, effectively talking about exactly what you said, with talking more about the benefits driven and how it's going to help people rather than about the tech itself, tends to get people's kind of engagement and awareness up that it's there, so that then they take the time to go away and learn more about it. At the end of the day, a lot of these people are quite time poor, so they don't have the time to sit away and go and understand this in detail. They need something quick, engaging and snappy in front of them, and they go, okay, yeah, actually, that looks interesting. That looks like something I could use in my job and could help me out. That's something I've been complaining about for the past 5 years and no one's done anything about. Finally, it's here. That's the response we want to be getting from people, rather than just talking about new tech that's going to do X, Y, Z. Let's really talk about why they should care about it and why they want to go and learn how to use that.
Lovely, Jo. Thank you for that, both of you. The next question that we have, when you work with frontline workers, what are some of the benefits they themselves talk about with teams and the existing set of Microsoft 365 products they might already be using?
Do you want me to kick us off, Carly?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlene. Why don't you give your point of view?
All right. There's one story that sticks out to me here, and it was probably one of the first projects that I worked on in the frontline worker space. And I had a chat. I was having a chat with an area manager actually, and they looked after multiple locations, as area managers do. And one of the things that he said to me was, and I kind of hadn't thought about this, was just how much they spend time traveling on the road, trying to get to lots of different locations, and that, you know, he didn't feel like he could be as effective because he had to spend time traveling to one place. Then he'd be able to speak to, you know, a store manager for a little while. Then he'd have to, you know, spend time traveling to the next place and speak to that store manager and the staff, etc. But he didn't really feel like he was actually having super valuable conversations. He didn't feel like they were able to work together as an area either. Like, how are they sharing their own best practices and what's going on in that store that's working really well? How are we able to replicate it in this store where we haven't really implemented that thing? And the challenges were there were just so many challenges, and this one person was responsible for kind of overseeing it all, but didn't really have a way of being able to, he couldn't physically get all those store managers to a location and say, hey, let's all sit down and work through this. It's just not possible. It's not practical. And it really hit home for me that, you know, I take for granted if I want to be able to speak to somebody, I can hit call, there we go. If I need to bring other people into the conversation, I can do that really nice and easily. And, you know, that's a really simple benefit, the benefit of a Teams meeting, to just be able to bring all those people together, to work together, to capture your notes in one space, to capture the outcomes in one space, to be able to track those tasks in one space. For me, that was so simple. And for him, that was such a major win. And I think when I had that conversation, that always comes back to me every time. I think, you know, Jo, you mentioned it before, they're so time poor. There's very little time that you can have to do these things. If you can make that one change for somebody, it saves them hours. That return on investment is absolutely huge. Not only does it mean that they don't have that additional travel time, but it also means they can be more effective. It means that their people can collaborate that bit better. It means that they're also able to track the progress of, if I'm asking you to implement this in one store because it works well in this other one, how can I track against that? Well, I can do that because we captured it as one of the actions out of the meeting. So for me, I think that is one of the kind of the biggest benefits that I see, and it always resonates to me. It always kind of brings me back. It was probably one of my earliest introductions in terms of doing this with clients, and I think it'll stick with me. Just a super simple, valuable use case.
Yeah, that's great, Charlene. And I'm curious, Sarah, I'd love to hear Microsoft's point of view too on something like that, or whether you find similar feedback, similar points of view.
Sure. So it does always go back to those simple use cases at the end of the day. One that we see both the frontline workers, but also their line managers or a head of operation sort of perk their ears to, and where we've seen real benefit really quickly are actually in the accessibility toolkit. So especially because frontline workforces tend to be multilingual, tend to be more diverse. Maybe there's more likelihood of neurodiversity, just considering the population of the frontline workforce, right? It's 80% of the population. So things like easy readers right within Teams, things like translation technology that lets you just translate messages from your team or your line manager. Those and anything that can also offer high contrast, we have that right built within Teams, right? So this whole accessibility toolkit is where people see real value immediately just by using Teams. Things that they struggled with that maybe they just accepted as part of the job that they didn't need to. It means that operations could operate more smoothly. It means that team members feel more accommodated for, more included, and it's one of those things that can happen instantaneously just as soon as they're on the platform.
Oh, that's exciting stuff. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. Joe, did you want to share anything from your point of view on this question?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a slightly different tilt on that. I thought that was really interesting around the accessibility piece. So before I was in change management, I actually used to work in employee engagement surveys. And we often see those classic yearly surveys that go around and people have one time a year where they can say what they think about what's happening. But actually our frontline workforce are the people who are out there working every day with customers, with our end users. They're the people who really see and experience what's going on. And I think another area that we can really see the benefits from with Microsoft 365 is giving them that platform to actually feed back to the business in what's working well, what needs to be developed or what needs some work, where they're seeing frustrations coming in, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who experience it every day. And we need to give people a platform to listen to them, to actually really think about how their experiences need to impact what's being changed and what that strategy is. So actually, I think I worded it earlier where I was talking about us communicating the strategy down, but I think that bottom up piece as well of kind of feeding in ideas and feeding in that experience every day is something really important there too. And I can imagine as a frontline worker finally being told, we're going to give you the space to do that and we're going to have somewhere people are going to listen to that, must just feel like, oh, finally someone's going to listen to me because I can tell you what the issues are down here that we're experiencing every day.
Thanks, Joe. That's great anecdotes, everybody. Thank you so much. It looks like that is it in terms of questions. So like Charlene mentioned, we do have more sessions coming your way this year, so make sure you get registered for those. And we'd love to see you at Fall in Love. It's a great event. If you can't make it, please let us know. We can send some collateral your way. And again, any questions, just reach out to us. We love talking frontline workers and we'd love to chat with you. Thank you again, Sarah, for bringing Microsoft and their perspective on frontline to the table. It was great having you. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Carly. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.